G'day, welcome to part 2 of our peer review of mainland migration to the Huon Valley, and more specifically our little town of Dover in the far south. In the last episode we looked at the statistics. We found out where these people were coming from, we found out why they were coming, and in this episode we're going to look at the impact. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. So let's start at looking at some more data, beginning with the Index of Relative Socioeconomic Disadvantage. Now, the figure for Australia is 1001, while Tasmania is generally well below that on 966. Interestingly, the Huon Valley is above the Tasmanian figure with 973.8. meaning that residents of the Huon are better off than Tasmanians on average. But let's look at some of the individual communities within the Huon Valley and look at their socioeconomic status. Grove, at the northern end of the valley, is sitting on 1053.5, well above the Australian average. Now, Grove is a community which is now almost totally dominated by interstate migrants. Many of those are of working age, and the vast majority send their children to private schools outside the Huon Valley. Now, in the 10 years from 2016, enrolments at the local high school, Huonville High School, have dropped from 463 students in 2016 to 281 students in 2025. But back to the data. My community of Dover and the further far south has a socioeconomic number of 913.9. more than 60 percentile points lower than Grove. So now, let's look at employment in the Huon Valley. Now, not surprisingly, with the Huon Valley being a rural area, the Apple Isle is named essentially after the Huon Valley, the biggest employment field is agriculture, forestry and fishing at 13.7%. followed by healthcare and social assistance at 12.8%. And we'll break that down further by looking at the employment in Dover and the far south. Here we have 32.2% employed in agriculture, forestry and fishing. And I can tell you that very, very few of those people are employed in agriculture or forestry. They are employed in aquaculture and wild catch fisheries. And if you add in those who are employed in manufacturing, wholesale, and also the professional, scientific and technical people, most of whom are also working with or for the aquaculture companies, it brings the total figure of employment in this area up to over 40% of the Dover workforce doing work connected with aquaculture and wild catch fisheries. So why is that a big deal? Let's go back to the Sailing Club. 25 years, this club has held an annual regatta at Easter. The regatta itself dates back to 1859. But since 2002, the regatta has been sponsored by either one of the two salmon aquaculture companies that have their basis in this region, namely Huon Aquaculture and later Tassal. And this year, 2026, the club broke with that tradition and the naming rights for the regatta were awarded to a local building firm. And not a big, huge construction company, a house building firm. Now, I've asked some members of this club how that actually came about, but they weren't able to provide me with an answer. But I find it highly unlikely that that little building firm outbid the $2 billion salmon companies for the naming rights for this regatta. But I think it's a sign of things to come. Remember how I said that I was the only Tasmanian member of the club when I visited here, with all the others being from the mainland, migrants, swamped by mainlanders? And the wealthy mainland migrants come here for lifestyle, natural environment, proximity to the coast, and proximity to open space. I've had two conversations here at this club shortly after I returned with recent mainland migrants who became members of the club. And on both occasions I was wearing this actual jacket, which I'll put the logo on so you can see it. Yeah, on both occasions I was wearing this actual jacket, which clearly says aquaculture training on it. But did that stop these migrants, one of whom had been here in the far south for a mere 3 weeks, telling me how the salmon industry was destroying the environment and should be shut down? I was incredulous. I maintained my cool, which is unlike me, but they were speaking to me as if I knew nothing about aquaculture. Now, I certainly know that 40% of the Dover workforce rely pretty much directly on the aquaculture and wild fishing industry. And the mainland migrant with the biggest profile on this is former ABC foreign correspondent Peter George, who lives round about here in Deep Bay.
I'm fighting also for all those people who work in this fish farming industry. So if I'm elected, I will say you cannot vote for Liberal or Labour, the old parties, if you care about the waterways. And I will take them on.
Yes, Peter, I'm sure you do care for the local communities, because as a condescending mainland migrant, you know what's best for Tasmanians, don't you? Now, before I get accused again, God forbid, for being political, I'll throw in this little next bit for some, let's say, political balance. Tasmanian Liberal Government Minister for the Police, Felix Ellis, recently was forced to apologise for uttering the name of the Port Arthur gunman in Parliament. Look, here in Tasmania, that is simply not done to mention that person's name.
Ms Butler, I think one of the things you need to understand about Port Arthur as well is your cap on firearms wouldn't have solved that problem either, because didn't have more than 10 firearms in Port Arthur.
These are up in Tasmania teaching me this stuff.
No, he didn't grow up in Tasmania. Another bloody migrant. We might need a little bit of cheering up after that one. So let's look at an amusing example of a blow-in from the mainland telling us that he knows better than us Tasmanians. Ron Williams and his partner Judy have a YouTube channel called Tasmanian Sea Change. They sold their business in Townsville in North Queensland and moved to Waratah in Tasmania for a sea change. Now, ironically, their home in Townsville was only about 7 kilometres from the sea, while their place in Waratah is either, well, depending on which sea you go to, it's either 58 kilometres from the sea or 53 kilometres from the sea, depending whether you go to the west coast or the north coast. But let's have a look at Ron's latest video.
G'day everyone, Ron back here from Tasmanian Sea Change. What we've got here is the water tank. Now, the water tank's 250 to 300,000 litre water tank. We had a few people way back saying the tank was too large for the area, in the way of we didn't need such a large tank.
And guess who one of those people was who told him that he didn't need a tank that big? Yep, yours truly. I used to have water tanks myself. But why does Ron know better than the locals who gave him the advice?
Coming from Queensland, places that have severe regular droughts that last for, you know, numbers and numbers of years. The last small drought we're in up there lasted 7.5 years. Having such a large water tank here on site gives us lots of options.
Ah yes, drought. So what is the annual rainfall in Townsville? Well, it's 1,134 millimetres of rain a year. And what is the annual rainfall in Waratah? A measly 2,162 millimetres of rain a year. Now, while not as wet as Tully in North Queensland, home of the big gumboot, Waratah is one of the wettest places in Australia. Now, to be fair to Ron, Townsville has a distinctly wet and dry season. So there are periods in Townsville when it doesn't rain. But how many days a year does it rain in Waratah? Oh, only 242. Pretty much, it rains 2 days out of every 3. But despite what the Tasmanians tell him, Ron, the mainland migrant, knows better than us. And he needs that 300,000 litre rainwater tank to prepare for the droughts. Muppet. In a previous video, I touched on the next point I'm going to focus on. And in fact, that video was shot right here. So let's revisit that.
Flashback.
On page 35, Dr. Bossy states that contemporary Tasmanian is still emerging from a colonised past. Come on, it's 2025. And while some of us might have convict ancestors, we're no more backward or colonised than any other place in Australia in modern society. And on page 33, Bossy says, quote, "Tasmanians don't choose to live on the island for the city life or healthcare or literacy rates, but for their convenient proximity to some of the most natural and diverse environments accessible to humans." No. That might be the choice for blow-ins who've moved here. But for us Tasmanians, we don't choose to live on the island for those reasons. The majority of us don't choose to live here at all. We've always lived here. Not as long as the Indigenous Tasmanians have, but this is our place.
End of flashback.
Now recently I caught up with a good friend and former colleague who happens to be a Tasmanian Aboriginal person. We were talking of the issue of being swamped by the mainland migrants. Now, while she herself doesn't really like the term First Nations people, she made a really interesting comment. She said that while she is First Nations Tasmanian, with the amount of mainlanders swamping here coming here, people like me are arguably seventh generation Tasmanians, should actually start referring to ourselves as Second Nations Tasmanians. As we are being subject to a second wave of what is essentially colonisation. People coming here to our native land and replacing our identity and our culture with their own. Now, I laughed at the time and I am still laughing now, but I must say the comment really hit me to the core. And I thought that maybe I was getting too emotional about this, as looking at the influx of mainlanders as a second wave of colonisation was perhaps going too far, until I found the very interesting following piece of research. Okay, now first up, the research paper, which we're going to examine in a second, is actually about New Zealand. But there are many, many parallels to what's happening to us here in Tasmania. In 2018, Katie Higgins from the University of Kiel in the United Kingdom wrote a paper entitled "Lifestyle Migration and Settler Colonialism: The Imaginative Geographies of British Migrants to Aotearoa, New Zealand." Now, for classification, Higgins was not writing about 19th century colonisation, 19th movement of people to New Zealand in the colonial settlement in the 19th century, but she was talking about migration of people from the UK to New Zealand in recent years. Higgins writes, quote, "This paper explores the imaginative geographies of relatively privileged migrants living in settler societies for their colonial continuities. It makes a case for historicising the common narratives of escape and of a return to a simpler life, and for problematizing a recurring disavowal of Indigenous presences. So while these migrants are not from another part of New Zealand, like the mainland migrants coming to Tasmania are, they're coming from the UK, their motivation for moving to New Zealand are like those of the mainlanders flocking to Tasmania. And while migration to New Zealand was once about work and labour, as it was pretty much here in Australia, Higgins says it's now about middle-class people moving to New Zealand for consumption, not production. Higgins finds that because these migrants tend to erase the presence of the Maori and to a lesser extent of the Pākehā society, it means, quote, an analysis of such migration should be attuned to the settler colonial continuities of contemporary migrations, which provides a more nuanced understanding of that movement's history and wider cultural and affective associations. Higgins concludes her paper by calling for, quote, greater consideration of how the imaginative geographies and orientations to the good life of lifestyle migrants may be contested, exclusionary and power-laden. She goes on to say, quote, that attention to the contested and exclusionary nature of imaginative geographies and orientations to the good life among migrants supports a more nuanced understanding of the continuities of settler colonial formations. Somewhere between positioning them as post-colonial polities. Wow! So, if a lecturer in sociological studies, politics and international relations says that we should look at lifestyle migration as colonialism, then that's good enough for this mug standing on a pier. So, my gut feeling that I had at the sailing club, that sense that my culture and place is being replaced by mainland migration, is not just a gut feeling. It's actually a reality, and sadly, I feel that it could well spell the end of what we knew as Tasmania. Our culture, our lifestyle, and ominously, our economy, especially in towns such as Dover. And even more ominously, for the future of the young people in our state, a future that is already fairly bleak. So, on that sad note, I'll conclude this peer review on the impact of demographic change in the Huon Valley. If you've liked this one, please click like, please subscribe, hit me up in the comments below, check out some of the other videos in the peer review series, and we'll see you again sometime, somewhere, standing on a pier as we conduct a peer review of something a bit more left field. Thanks for watching. I'd like to dedicate this video to two people that I respected greatly. One of whom, Mark Oliver, was a fellow aquaculture training colleague, and his funeral was only today. He passed away from bowel cancer at the age of 53. Rest in peace, Mark. He was a really nice guy, and he was a Queenslander. And the other one I'd like to dedicate this to is the late John Kudelka, famous Tasmanian cartoonist, whose little Tasmania Never Come Here have been appearing throughout these videos. My mum was good friends with John Kudelka's mum. I must admit I never actually met John, and we did sort of disagree on some of his views, but I must say he is one of the funniest and most creative cartoonists, and I have, I think, a dozen of his cartoons on the wall at my place. So, John Kudelka, rest in peace. And to all of those mainlanders, Tasmania is awful. Never come here.